Welcome back to Mad Dots Art. I hope that you had a chance to watch my intro, but if you haven't and you've landed here, I am doing a little how-to series for painting dot mandalas. And I guess first I'll mention this is not necessity, but you probably want to have something to cover your work surface. Because the paint, even if you're being really careful, you'll find that paint will just splash. I have glitter and plaster and everything on mine. These are just craft mats. They're made of silicone, so they're washable and very, very affordable. I think I got a 3-pack on Amazon for right around $6. So they're handy to have. I also use Lazy Susan, and that is really helpful with symmetry because you can be looking at each point from the same vantage point, I guess, so that you can get your symmetry a little bit more on center. Whereas if you're not, reaching over across from your work or not looking at it at the same angle, you can have some symmetry issues that crop up. And also, it's hard to not get your hand or your arm into the paint when you're reaching around. So, not essential, but it definitely helps. And then you need some kind of surface to work on, put your art on. For me, when I first started, I like to just cut up old popcorn box or that kind of paperboard material and just coat it with some kind of background paint, which acrylics are the kind of paint that we're using for dot mandala art. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I have the background or the paint video. But whatever surface you're working with, some people hop right away to canvases, which is fine, which is great. They're a little more pricey to work with, so for practice it's nice to have cardstock, or also wood surface. So I will show you mine. Cardstock is kind of what I graduated to after I was done working on just paperboard or poster board. Poster board is really hard to coat because it's kind of glossy, which I found out after the fact. But I bought this one at Walmart when I got it earlier in the summer. I think it was less than $6 for 50 sheets. So with my cardstock, I've done a few different things. I will definitely use it for practicing and testing out different things, like if I put the dots closer, what does it look like? Or if I bunch them all together, does it look good? So I've tested out some things like that. I've also just kept track of some of the little elements that I have liked, especially ones that I came up with on my own, although sometimes I'll keep track of other people's and use those too. And another fun thing that I've done with mine, which is very handy when you start getting paints, to make kind of a grid of what they look like on a light background or a dark background. Some of them look quite different depending on the background. So I hope this shows on camera. But especially some of the sheen colors or the lighter colors will look very different on a light background versus the dark background. And there's some of my metallics. So that's kind of handy. It's nice when you're trying to pick out colors to match which ones go together nicely. But a lot of times I will just go ahead and put a background color on my cardstock. This one I have cut out to a 4x6 shape, because you will find I like working on square objects much better. However, finding a frame for them is, if you can find them, they're very pricey. So cardstock is just nice, and then if you think of it or you want to get a frame for not having to spend a lot of money, you might want to just cut them down to a 4x6 or 5x7 so you can find a frame that's good. I always recommend putting a coat of paint on whatever surface you're going to paint with, even if it comes the color that you want to use. The reason is, if you don't, well, there's a couple reasons. As I mentioned before, the wood, these are just MDF, just thin wood discs that I get. It has a rough grain to it. Any kind of wood is typically going to. And then also canvases, even if they say that they're primed and ready to go, they are woven, so they have a bit of a texture, so they're kind of bumpy. So with the bumpier stuff, for sure it's nice to have this product called gesso. I got this at Hobby Lobby for $10, so you can always look for your, and it's called Master's Touch. There's a lot of different companies that make it, and I believe you can get this in white, black, or clear. So if you wanted to do a different color, say a blue or a red, you could just use that clear coat, or you could use either of these two. First, to help with the texture, this fills in that rougher texture so you have a smoother surface. Also, the main reason that I will always recommend having a base coat color is, trying to find my example. If you don't have a base coat color down and you make a mistake, if you try to paint over it with a color that doesn't match, it's really obvious. So on this one, I just painted this straight on the cardstock. I don't know if I forgot or if I was just playing around with shapes or whatever, but I made a big mistake. And normally with your canvas or your wood products, you have a little leeway with time. With a wet paper or Q-tip, you can just pick it off the surface, get your paint off the surface. With cardstock, that really is not super, I would say it's not really effective on straight cardstock. So if you have your acrylic paints underneath, instead of, you can absolutely try to get some of that paint off with a Q-tip, but you can also just paint right on top of it, and your background color and that color that you painted will just match, and you won't be able to see it anymore. So usually when you're painting, you're gonna find, even I've been doing this a year, but I still get little splashes when I'm painting, or a lot of times I'll accidentally get my wrist in it while I'm doing something else. So really good idea to go ahead and put that background color on before you do any of your work. So to get your center, you're gonna need a couple tools. Actually, to get the center, just the one tool. You'll need a ruler, and here to find my center dot on these, I'm just placing my ruler corner to corner, and I'm going to use a watercolor pencil. This is the Arteza brand, and I cannot find it in just white anymore. They used to have a 3-pack of white or cream. So I bought this less expensive brand called Hello Artist, and as long as it's watercolor and not just a colored pencil, watercolors are water soluble, so they'll wipe off with a wet, moist Q-tip, but regular color pencils won't. So you'll have your guidelines still showing when your work is done, which is not the best thing. So you would just trace this side to side. I'm just gonna kind of mesh out the center. And then on the other corners, and then I've got my, hopefully you can see that there. So then I've got my center dot. Some people just stick with their ruler and just make lines around that. You can also use a compass to make rings around. The reason I have such a big one is because I do work on these bigger surfaces. This is actually a 12-inch. And most compasses do not go that large unless you specifically buy one that big. I don't have a small compass because I don't love them. So I got this tool, which is called a helix angle and circle maker. And I got mine on Amazon. So basically I'm lining up the center of the helix, which has got that little arrows there, I hope you can see that, with my center dots. And then I can just put my pencil in at different increments and twirl. The middle part moves and the base of it stays put. So that's really handy. This only goes up to 6 inches, I think, so it's not going to get you everything. It's not going to cover the whole amount. So 9 times out of 10, what I will do for my guidelines is use a guideline stencil. So these come in different points, I guess. So this is 8 points. If you count it around, there's 8 different line segments on there. This one is the 12 points, and this one is 16. It's my most used one, I think. I just got really used to it. I like the feel. It's silicone and it's flexible. And I do use those. Silicone is really handy for if you have a shape that's not flat. So on these stones that I make, that's really handy, because then I don't have to try and fight with this hard plastic thing that doesn't quite line up for me. It just lays really nice on there. So with your stencil, you would just set it on your center dot and then just make your guidelines. You absolutely can paint dot mandalas without making guidelines. Some people are fantastic at just you know, that visual spatial skill of being able to kind of figure out where the next dot should go. I'm not. So I like to have as many different grid line points as I can. And you can get fancier stencils if you want. It's just, for me, I find it a little harder to figure out what I'm gonna fit inside of those little areas. So you won't see me working with those too often, but they're out there for people who are very creative. So, another thing that you are going to need, once you have all your guidelines on, you need something to dot with. Some people dot with brushes. I am not someone who knows how to do that. So I use dotting tools. And this is my favorite brand. It's DIY Mandala Stones, and I get mine on Amazon. I'm not sure, and they may have some on their websites, DIYMandalastones.com. I'm gonna guess that they're probably the same price, but I've never actually shopped on their website. This particular one is a lot larger sizes, so what I would use the larger ones for is the center dot on a big piece. Otherwise, these are not my most used tools. These that are all full of paint. These are the ones that I use. These are the smaller sizes. This comes from size 1 all the way up to 16. And something to note about the tools is they are not all universal size. So DIY Mandala size 9 is not the same as the number 9 for Happy Dotting Company or Mark's Mandalas. I have figured out by their website that Happy Dotting Company does theirs in millimeters. So if you're looking at a 6, that means it's 6 millimeters. Whereas DIY Mandala stones is actually twice of the millimeter size. So your number 10 tool is actually a 5 millimeters. So that can help you when you're working with them. You can find other tools. So DIY Mandalas, their basic set I believe is about $23. So that might not be right for everyone, especially if you're not sure if you're gonna like it. So you can find these colorful acrylic rods in a lot of places for, boy, less than $10. If you're looking at Temu, they're definitely less than $5, I believe. And sometimes they have sets that come with the acrylic rods and also your nail stylus tools, which you'll also need. These don't have as many size options as the little bit more expensive tools, which have one size on each end of the tool. So I get a 9 and a 10 on there. So it's there's a little more variety in the higher end tools, but you absolutely can use those less expensive ones. So I did kind of mention these are nail dottings. They're for doing fancy nails. They are also very affordable and easy to find right now. If you just type in dot mandala tools, these will come up even though they were originally created for dotting your nails. They typically do not come with sizes on them, so I just referred back to the place where I bought them. I think I got these on Amazon, and then I just labeled them once I figured out which was which. But these you use for your walked dots, or your petals, it's called, the smaller dots, and then your bigger ones you'll be using for little inker center dots on there. So tools are good. You will need something for your paint. So I have a palette here. For demonstration purpose, I do not use a palette very often because they tend to dry out while you're using them. Usually within 15 minutes you're going to start noticing a texture and consistency difference. But sometimes if I just need to mix a color that I'm not going to use a lot, but just maybe for one project and I'm just going to use it quick and be done with it, then I'll just leave it in the palette. And if you are going to use a palette, it is the most affordable way to go for starting out. You probably want to have it covered while you're working, or partially covered. I've heard that press and seal wrap is really good for keeping your paint fresher. And then also you could alternatively just put a damp but not wet paper towel on top while you're working. And then if you need to store it overnight, you can just put that damp cloth on there and insert it into a gallon freezer bag. Acrylic paints, I'm told there's some controversy online. People are saying that it's made out of little pieces of plastic. So you don't really... A lot of people say you don't want to dump it down your drain because it will clog your drain. And then I've had other people's that say, well, my husband's a plumber and he said as long as you use soap, it's okay. I don't like to take the chance. So for me, I just let my paint just dry right in my palette, and then once it's dry, it will peel right out. And this to me is kind of a sign of what people were saying, that you don't want that clogging up your drains. If I think about that, even if just some of that formed and started to collect in your plumbing, you can see how that could be problematic. So my palettes are never perfectly clean, and that's because I chip the paint out of them instead of putting that down my drain. You could also take a wet paper towel and clean those up, but for me, I don't really use palettes that often. What I prefer are little paint pots. So I'll take the colors that I do use a lot, and I'll put them in the paint pot. So then when I'm working, I will just go ahead and use what I'm going to use. And then when I'm going to the next color, I'll just switch and open up the next color. So that's handy. Do make sure you read your reviews on them when you buy them. Excuse me. I got these bigger paint pots from Amazon, and they're kind of difficult to open, but what I've noticed is they keep my paint super fresh for a really long time. Some of these have been in there a few months and they're still good. Or these I got from Temu. They're really easy to open, but they don't keep my paint fresh for very long, maybe a week, and then I'm starting to see the consistency change. I have mine numbered because I have over 100 different paints, so it just helps when I need to refill my pot to know which color to put in there. So that's another little tip. I also, when I mix my paints, I use toothpicks to mix. So that's another thing. Not great for the environment, I suppose, but it's saving my plumbing to not use something that I have to wash off. You can use like a disposable cup to rinse things off in and then pour it off outside. But for me, I'm like, is that good for the environment or my grass, or is that going to get into the rainwater? I don't know. I just like to be able to throw things away. So also, when you're dotting, after you use one color, you're going to wipe your tool off and put it away. Same with my tools. I don't really wash them because I don't want to have to wash that down my sink, but the ends are always clean. So every time I'm done with one color, I just wipe it off as good as I can. Some of this paint comes from when you have a lot of paint on your cloth and it gets back on the other part. That's that. Well, I don't know that I have much else to show you with items. Some of the other little helpful things that you really are not a must, but are nice to have. I think I mentioned Q-tips for wiping up mistakes. Those are really good. Those are nice in the end to wipe off your guidelines as well. And then I also bought these little eyedropper bottles. One is filled with my thinning agent and one is just filled with plain water. There's a few different kinds of paints that I work with, and I will go over those in the next video when I talk about the paints. I guess one last thing I'll mention, not a necessity, but for me, I always sign mine on the back. This one I actually used a jelly pen that I got a good deal on Temu. It's kind of not real visible though. But you might want some paint pens, acrylic paint pens. That's another thing that you have to do your research on, because some of them don't work great consistently. So that's another thing you might want when you start getting to the point where you want to actually either give them as a gift or sell them. So just want to make sure that you sign them and have a title on them. Alright guys, I'm going to stop this video here, and next I will come back to talk about paints consistency, different kinds of paints and how they act, and how to fix paints if they're not the right consistency. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.